Hello folks, Simon here, welcome back to the channel. Brief update for you regarding Final Fantasy XVI, and this follows on from the official update that we received last year that's up on the screen right now about that 6-month development delay and the fact that we can expect more news about FF16 in spring of this year, so I'm sure we'll all look forward to that. But today's follow-up comes in the way of a bit of a leak, really, from Jordan Midler. If you don't know who Jordan Midler is, he is a journalist who works for the Video Games Chronicle, so he has his sources within the industry. So as we get started, I do just want to point out that I have recently begun tweeting over at Fuzzfinger01. I'm starting to push that account a little bit more and use it, so if you want further updates and that from me, it might be worth just checking that out and dropping a follow if you do use Twitter. Alright, so this leak by Mr. Midler pretty much confirms what many of us already suspected, and that is that Final Fantasy XVI is really the next big game in this genre that Square Enix are going to be pushing ahead of its inevitable release. Now, I said in my last video on this topic that I do kind of expect, at least it's very possible in my opinion, that Final Fantasy XVI is going to be in our hands before the end of this year, even in lieu of this 6-month development delay. Okay, I do still anticipate a holiday release for FF16, and this new leak pretty much gives a little more credence to that. So we're going to have a look at that now. Mr. Midler has been posting over at the Reset Era forum, and I'm not going to share absolutely everything he says, but you can check out the thread. I'll leave a link to it if you wish to do so. But first of all, in this comment, he does mention console exclusivity, and he expands on this a little bit, that basically this is something that's here to stay for Square Enix. They're very cozy with Sony right now, and console exclusivity has more to do with the exclusivity between the consoles themselves rather than PC. So he says that we can continue to expect the Final Fantasy games, for example, to be ported over to PC, but in terms of Xbox releases, unfortunately that's probably not going to happen like ever, at least not at the moment. So yeah, we've got Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 1 on PC now, that has recently been released. But the exclusivity window for that game did end quite a while back, and of course, we've not heard anything about an Xbox release. Mr. Midler says, don't get your hopes up, it's probably not going to happen. Now, more importantly then for today, he's talking about an unannounced game here that Square Enix have in development, and he says that they didn't show this title or reveal this title, even though it was kind of expected that they would, because Final Fantasy, this is Final Fantasy XVI, hasn't been shown yet because of that delay. And it was supposed to by this point. So this is interesting, okay? And he later goes on to say, where are we here, that the unannounced game itself isn't a Final Fantasy game, but a game that would potentially divert focus from Final Fantasy XVI. So, a couple of interesting points. This is why I wanted to make this video. First of all, there is an unannounced game in the works at Square Enix that isn't Final Fantasy. It's also, Mr. Midler goes on to tell us, not a game from Kingdom Hearts franchise or from Dragon Quest, but it is potentially a game that would divert focus away from FF16. So to me, that indicates it is another role-playing game. That's the first point, you know, that I wanted to draw your attention to, the fact that there is this unannounced game that we should have heard about but haven't yet because of Final Fantasy XVI. This is Square's main focus within this particular genre. Okay, they are going to want to start pushing Final Fantasy XVI. Now, this is going to start presumably in the spring, which is what Yoshi P said, and this is going to draw all of the focus to Square, so they want to make sure that everybody's aware of Final Fantasy XVI, they want to market it, they want to hype it up, and that's why I suspect we can expect a release of the game by the end of this year. They're not going to want to draw focus to Final Fantasy XVI forever, they've got other games to talk about. Now, this unannounced game, what could it be? Well, the only thing I can think of, and maybe I'm missing something so you guys can share in the comments if you think it's something else, I think it could be Chrono Cross, okay? The rumours for a Chrono Cross remaster or remake, probably the former, are getting stronger by the day. We've got reputable journalists talking about this, that it exists, it's happening, okay? And yet it hasn't still been announced. So, because whatever this unannounced game is could potentially draw focus away from Final Fantasy XVI, this isn't some action title, you know, or some Marvel release or something. This, to me, is a similar type of game. and of course Chrono Cross Final Fantasy. They're kind of linked in a way, they always have been. So to me, it makes sense that that's what it could be. But as I say, I would like to hear your thoughts about this. You know, is Chrono Cross a game that you would be excited for if a remaster or remake was announced? And if it was announced, would that potentially distract you from the release of Final Fantasy XVI? So yeah, like I say, let us know in the comments about that. But of course, in terms of Final Fantasy XVI, this is very good news, as it demonstrates that Square are now getting to that stage where they are really focused on heavily promoting and marketing this particular game. And if they're following a similar model as they did with Final Fantasy VII Remake, which was we had a whole period of quietness where we didn't know anything really about when the game was coming out, to bang, we started to get information dumps, and then within months the game was in our hands. I'm kind of expecting a similar thing here, that from spring, which is where Yoshi P has told us we can start to hear more information, that is where Square are going to start going all in with the marketing with FF16, and then by the end of this year, it should be with us. That's my expectation. Of course, it might not happen like that, but I think all the confluences so far are pointing in that direction. But anyway, guys, are you excited for the release of Final Fantasy XVI? Do you like what you've seen so far in the various reveals and trailers that we've had? I'd be very interested in hearing the thoughts of my audience, so please do let me know down below. But thank you so much for checking out this video. I hope it's been somewhat informative for you. If it has, maybe consider dropping a like, and I'll catch you soon. As more news is revealed, I'll be here to share that with you. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.